All right, now we're doing this week Lecture 4 overview, Ethics in Psychological Research. Okay, ethics in psychological research. One of the things that we're going to discuss is first, ethics in research. One of the things that I wanted you to do, and I think it's always important for psychology majors, is to go back and read the original studies that's related to ethics. And so you read the prison study by Zimbardo, you read the tea room study by Humphreys, and then you've also saw two videos, one on the Tuskegee syphilis study, and guess what? Guess what? Guess what? It's extra credit time, extra credit time, extra credit time, and this is only extra credit through if you watch the video. What other video did you watch that's related to ethics? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's immortal. It's immortal. Okay, now we're also going to talk about the Belmont Report and the 3 ethical principles, deception in psychological research, and some other ethical issues. So the prison study, the tea room study, and the Tuskegee syphilis study are 3 important studies if you're interested in understanding unethical practices. But there are numerous other studies as well, such as the Milgram study, the uranium study that was done where they, the United States government exposed citizens to uranium, and it was to see the effects of radioactive materials, and also to veterans. There's also the radiation study that was done through Quaker Oats. And so there's a variety of different ethical studies that have been done in the United States, but also internationally as well. And a lot of these ethical practices, which you should have learned about in general psychology, and when we start our social psych class, which will start in the spring semester, you will learn about unethical practices as well. And so hopefully this is a review for you as it relates to ethics and research. And so let's get started. All right, ethical principles for research involving human participants. Okay, the Belmont Report. Here's a link to the Belmont Report if you want to read it. It pretty much articulates the 3 basic ethical principles related to research involving human participants: respect for persons. And I want you to, when I go through this PowerPoint, I want you to think about the studies that you had to review for this week. The study of the research that was done on Henrietta Lacks, was that respect for persons? Did it have benevolence? Was it justice? Was the tea room study, did it have respect for person? Did it have benevolence? Did it have justice? What about the Tuskegee experiment? I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions about the 3 basic principles and see how these principles were violated by these studies. Respect for persons. There are 2 broad ideas. Individuals should be treated as autonomous agents, and individuals with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. So it's really important to think about issues of confidentiality when you're doing research with human subjects, and how you are going to protect that level of confidentiality. Respect for persons. Benevolence. I don't know why I can't talk today. Benevolence. Acts of kindness or charity. And the Belmont Report, this is an obligation. So there's two general rules. Do not do harm, and you have to maximize benefits and minimize harms. And so they really want you to make sure that when you are participating in research with human participants, that you are making sure that you are not causing any particular deleterious effects or long-lasting adverse effects on the participants. And actually, they don't want you to have any kind of adverse impacts on participants. And so that's why they have these two general rules about do not harm and maximize benefits and minimize any type of harms and deception. And we're going to talk about deception later. Justice. And so justice, who ought to receive the benefits of research and bear its burdens. And so injustice occurs when an entitled benefit is denied or when a burden is imposed unduly. So think about Henrietta Lacks. Was justice done there? What about the Tuskegee experiment? Was justice done there? What about in the tea room study? I just want you to think about these things. So, the Tuskegee right here, it gives you a great example. So think about it. They used disadvantaged rural African American men to study the untreated course of a disease that affects many other populations. Those men were deprived of treatment once it was available. And one thing that I've always wanted to know about the Tuskegee experiment was what happened to their partners? What about the women or partners that they might have had who were never treated, and what was the impact on the children? Just a thought about justice. Just a thought about justice. So the application of these principles in informed consent. And we don't have any text, but we do have details about these in the articles and also on your PowerPoint. You need to exercise special care with certain populations like prisoners, children, youth, also women who are expecting. Information must be easily understood so people can make an informed decision. So normally when people write an informed consent document, it is written at a 6th through 8th grade level, so that if you are doing research that's out in the community, people can understand what they are agreeing to. And also, it's really important in your informed consent that you have a statement in it that says that a person can stop participating without any repercussions at any time. So people will not feel obligated to, because we know in the Milgram study. Now, what is the Milgram study? Extra credit time. It wasn't one of your readings, but it is a classic psychological study. So get your cell phones out, get on your computer and Google, and I want you to tell me, extra credit time, extra credit time. What is the Milgram study? Because we do know that in certain situations, people will yield to a authority figure. And so I want you to really think about that as it relates to issues of consent. Again, and this third point is really important. Avoid hyperclaiming or stating that the research is likely to achieve goals that it's unlikely to. So sometimes people will, in some of the medical research, people have made claims about if you participate in this research, it could lead to a particular discovery, but they're not really sure about that because, as I said before, everything starts off as a hypothesis, and then it has to be replicated over time so that people can see what the benefits are. Just because you did one study in one particular population, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to transfer to another population. And so you have to really be very careful about making these overzealous, hyper-claiming statements. And you always have to weigh the cost analysis benefit of doing this as it relates to harm, and especially if you're going to use deception. And then you should always have a fair selection process for participants, so that when you're conducting your study, that every person who has the characteristics of interest has an opportunity to participate or be recruited for that study. Now, 6 key themes in ethical research: informed consent, freedom for coercion, protect the physical and psychological harm. So for example, when I was a graduate student, we did a study looking at how people reacted to either ambiguous comments about a particular issue, or comments that could be perceived as racially insensitive. And so we had individuals connected to a high blood pressure machine. And so it was an amazing study, because people would be looking very calmly when particular types of statements were being made, especially the racial insensitive statements were being made, but their blood pressure they were boiling with their blood pressure. And in one case, we had a participant who became, their blood pressure skyrocketed. It went up so high very quickly that we had to literally stop the study, because it was number 3, protection from physical and psychological harm. And so we had to share with the participant what the purpose of the study was, and if they needed to seek any other type of assistance outside of the study, we provided that information as well. Protection of privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity. All of those things are important, because when people participate in research, they want to be guaranteed that their identity is kept safe. And so it's important for the researcher to make sure that that occurs. And then again, you always have to think about the cost benefits to trying to answer your question. And if the risks are much higher, then you really need to think about that. And then debriefing. Debriefing is very important. After you finish your study, you have to sit down with your participants and tell them basically what was the purpose of the study, why the study was conducted that way, and give them an opportunity to ask questions. So debriefing is extremely important. You just don't do the study and say, hey, see you later, deuces, thank you. No, you don't do that. You have to debrief. And so when is deception permissible? This is really important, because for our study that we did looking at how people responded to either racially sensitive comments versus non-racial sensitive comments, there were some deception in the ad. So people thought that they were coming into a meeting in which they were going to just be talking about these particular topics. They didn't know that they were coming into a meeting in which they were going to have to engage in a debate against a person from another ethnic or racial background. And that person was a part of the study. That person had a script, and in that script they would be primed for when they were going to say a racial cue. And so that was the form of deception in that particular study, and we explained that when we debrief the participants. Okay, there we go. So when is deception permissible? And so APA has guidelines about that. It's when the research is important, when there are no alternatives, there is no foreseeable harm to participants. And so there's a really good website on APA about deception and ethics. So if you want to go and read more about that, it gives you some greater detail about that. But in regards to the second point, this is the key. Sometimes deception is the only way to investigate important questions. And as long as you're able to debrief your participants in a way that is that follows the beneficent justice and doing no harm, then you can explain why the deception was needed. And so when we shared with the participants for our study why we did a deception, they agreed that it's very hard to see what the impact is of when you are not expecting to experience a racial slight, and then when it occurs, how does your body react to that at the physiological level? And we do know that there's research that shows that there are significant relationships as it relates to overall physical health and having to endure what people would call these microaggressions that occur. Okay, and so these are just some thoughts on APA and deception. Now this is really interesting because if you've been following APA, and this is me going on a side tangent. This is a side tangent. So this is a side tangent. You're not going to be questioned on this, but I do want you to know, and I want you to think about what was APA's role as it relates to interrogation and using interrogation techniques with the U.S. government. So if you just Google, this is an opportunity for you to Google interrogation techniques and APA, and think about the APA ethical guidelines and what occurred when psychologists and the military got together and decided to do some interrogations. So that's all I'm going to say. And I'm not trying to be political, but I think it's important, if you're going to become a psychologist, that you are aware of some of the things that have just recently happened as it relates to psychology, ethics, and interrogation. So now, APA and deception. Psychologists do not conduct a study involving deception, and I've already gone over these 3 points. So one of the things when I was a student and people were using PowerPoints and they just read it to me, talk about a drive me crazy moment. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to allow you to read the slide yourself, because it basically summarizes what I just shared with you. Now, one of the things that, and this is an article that was highly cited in the 90s about when you're thinking about research and how you think, what are the payoffs? What are the benefits? Why are you doing this particular type of research? So if it's high utility, low cost, do the research. If it's low utility and high cost, don't do the research. And it's important that and these are 2 examples of high, low, low, high. And that's it. Any questions? Any questions about anything? Well, if you don't have any questions, you can email me. Well, please email me. After you review this, if you don't have any questions, you don't have to email me. If you do have any questions, please email me. This is information that you should have had in your other classes when we talk about ethics. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. Take care.